Our Heavenly Father, once more we offer unto Thee the gratitude of our hearts for all these earthly blessings. Bless this food to its intended use. Pardon and forgive us our sins. Finally, when Thou art done with us, You up in heaven receive us to Thy eternal and everlasting kingdom. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. My name is Beverly Shaw. I'm the youngest child of Delbert William Johnson and Annie Lee Moore Johnson, and I'm going to try my best to do the family history for the Johnson family history. So if there's any mistakes, it's all mine. The first one I'll start with is Grandpa Johnson. Would be my Grandpa Johnson, so he'd be everybody else's granddaddy, as Donnell has on the back. He was born November the 16th, 1854, and he passed away on Piance Creek in Colorado on November 14th, 1934. He was born in Buchanan, Berrien County, Michigan. And he came to Colorado with Mother and Dad and all the kids that had been born in Texas. He made the trip with them, and he stayed in Colorado all the rest of his life. And us kids used to take milk and cookies and anything that Mother had over to his house, because he lived a little way from us. And he always had cinnamon muffins, and he'd have tea for us. It's been mentioned that he always covered it with a white cloth. I don't remember that, but if he did, that was a very elegant thing for him to do. And other than that, I don't remember a whole lot, because I wasn't all that old, not as old as I am now. So I guess the next thing that I can say is start with Mother and Dad when they came from Texas out here. And they had, I have it in this book, so I'm going to kind of read some of it so that I won't make too many mistakes. But Mother and Dad were married in Texas on May 1st, 1904. They settled in Texas and began to raise a family. Ezra Ray was born on February the 3rd, 1905 in Bartlett, Texas. Ray was killed in an accident when he worked for Wagner Company in Denver on October the 10th, 1968. He was buried in Denver, Colorado. Their next child was Johnny Delbert, born in Granger, Texas on December the 4th, 1906. Their first daughter, Gladys, was born in Bartlett, Texas on September 24th, 1908. Next was Mary Edith, also born in Bartlett on June the 14th, 1910. The family left Bartlett, and their fifth child, Waymon D., was born in Crockett, Texas on December the 9th, 1912. Roy Leslie was born on August the 17th, 1917 in Davila, Texas. On January the 18th, 1920, Winnie Mae was born in Ladonia, Texas. Winnie always called it Ladonia. The last child to be born in Texas was Ira Clifton, which known to everyone else is Pat, who was born in Honey Grove on December the 4th, 1920. Dell was engaged in cotton farming, and in 1923 the family decided to sell the holdings in Texas and move to Colorado. All their land and possessions were sold, with the exception of the few items that could be placed in the old Model T touring car or one of the two Model T trucks they brought to make the trip with. Some of Dell's final crop of cotton was made into mattresses that were used to sleep on during the 3-week trip. Dell's father, Ezra Rake, accompanied the family on the journey to Colorado. The family left from Ladonia, Texas. They traveled during the day and camped out at night. Annie and the older children learned to cook over a campfire, a talent they would use many times in the years to come. The most vivid memories of the trip involved the drive over Battle Mountain. Annie remembers the part of the trip as very scary. The road was narrow and winding and steep. Sheer drop-offs followed their ascent and descent of the pass. The family pulled into Rifle, Colorado 3 weeks after leaving Texas. They bought supplies and headed for Piance Creek. The family spent their first summer sleeping in tents near the Bardee School up Ryan's Gulch. My dad, Delbert William, was married before. He was married to Mandy. I don't know what her last name was, and I don't know what year they were married. And they had 2 children, Myrtle Johnson Hodge, and she was born May the 11th, 1898, and she passed away May the 22nd, 1932. And Charlie was older than Myrtle, excuse me, and I don't have his exact birth dates or here either, so we'll have to, maybe somebody in the family will come up with that. Okay, we'll continue on with the after the folks got to down to Piance Creek. With fall approaching and a large family to feed, it was decided to move temporarily to Morisana Mesa, near Grand Valley, and work in the fruit orchards. The older members of the family all worked, and Annie canned all the fruit possible. Their daughter, Virginia Alice, was born at the Eames Fruit Ranch on July the 11th, 1924, in a tent near the berry patch. And Virgie always laughed and said, well, that's neat because nobody else was born in a tent. So she thought that was fun after a while. After the fruit harvest of 1924, the family returned to Piance Creek to homestead. They chose West Stewart for the homestead. Annie and the children stayed alone at their new home. The older boys packed water and wood, and the girls helped cook and take care of the younger children. In need of money, Dell took a job driving the mail from Rifle. That first winter was very long, with lots of snow and cold weather. They melted snow for water and carried trees down from the mountains to be chopped for wood. The family lived in a 2-room log cabin with a dirt roof and floor, and Mother she sprinkled water on the floor to make it and get it so that when it dried it'd be hard, and so she could sweep it better. There was wood-burning stoves in each room to help cut the chill of the cold wind. The 2 older boys worked most of the winter at neighboring ranches to help provide for the family. Waymon built a wooden sled to entertain the children during the long winters. In the ensuing years, the family moved a number of times. They lived across the road from the Stewart Schoolhouse near the Old Land Ranch, then moved to the Foot Place on Lower Piance Creek. The family briefly left Piance Creek to live at the Upper Harris Place on West Rifle. In the fall, Annie and the children moved down to the Brown Place so the children could go to school. It was while living there at the Brown Place that their final child, and I do mean final, that was me. I was born Beverly Jean, April the 8th, 1927. The family returned to the Piance Creek about 2 years later and moved on to the Milo Love Ranch. Then a move was made to the Mager PL Ranch, where the family remained for a number of years. Water for cooking and cleaning was hauled from a spring near the house. The clothes and diapers were washed on a scrub board by Annie and the older girls. A trip to town was made in the fall for a wagon load of groceries to last the winter. And I remember Dad had come back with slabs of bacon and big boxes of apricots, dried apricots and prunes and all kinds of stuff that we'd have. It was kind of a neat time when he'd come home with everything to eat. And a large garden was grown in the summer, so vegetables, pickles, and kraut could be canned for the winter months. And Virgie and I used to go down in the cellar, and we'd take the lid off the sauerkraut, and we'd snitch a little. And Mother finally figured out we were taking it, so she put a stop to that. Each fall, a trip was made to the lower valley for fruit to can and apples to store in the cellar. Then, when the long nights of winter came, the children could sit around the large bowl of popcorn and apples and have delicious homemade candy. Ice was cut in the winter and stored in the ice house for the summer use, and I have pictures of that we'll have in the video. Blizzards with 40-degree below zero temperatures often howled over the creek, and blankets were heated to keep the children warm on their way to school. As spring came and temperatures warmed, many visitors came to the Johnson house. The ice was used to make ice cream. Annie could make the best ice cream you ever ate, kind of brings tears to my eyes when I think about that ice cream. It was so good. And she used to put grape nuts in it, and it's kind of like putting pieces of caramel in it now, but it was the best ice cream I ever ate. It probably wouldn't taste that good today. Some days saw a rodeo at the ranch with Annie cooking for 25 to 30 people. It's a lot of people. Many parties and dances were held at the Rock School. The children loved to go to these with their parents. Around midnight, during a break in the dancing, sandwiches, cake, and coffee were served. Then the dancing started again and lasted until dawn. The younger children were bedded down on the desks or in the corner of the one-room school. I'm going to have to quit. I'm going to cry. I don't know why. I guess just thinking about the ice cream and mother. For entertainment, the youngsters made up their own games. The daily trip to the soda fountain was a mixture of cocoa, sugar, and pure cream with a touch of vanilla, with as many spoons as there were kids gathered around. And I tell you, that was good, especially we get Mother's real rich cream, and it tasted like milk chocolate. As soon as school was out, the grandkids came to visit. All chores were shared with a very ingenious method of drawing lots. When Beverly drew wash and dry dishes both, she cried a lot. And also, there was lots of times that I cried a lot when I had to wash the separator, because you had all those little discs that had to be separated, and you couldn't get them out of line, because if you did, the cream wouldn't separate from the milk. And it was quite a deal. I've got one down in the basement now. The water for washing clothes was heated in a large iron kettle in the backyard. All of the water had to be carried up the hill from the spring. The washer was a gasoline-powered motor, and wash day greeted everyone with a continual put-put-put bang until the last pair of Levi's was run through the wringer and hung on the line. Also, Annie made all of her soap in the big iron kettle out in the backyard. And the soap was made from lye and lard, and I don't remember the rest of the recipe, but that was the general. Then it would be poured out into a pan and then cut it like you would cake or candy. Summer evenings, after the day's work and the evening meal was over and the dishes were done, and before the kerosene lamps were lit, was time for games. In order to determine who was it, we played one potato, two potato, Annie over, Run Sheep Run, and Punch the Iceman was played in the old red barn at the Mega Ranch, which had more hiding places, with everyone trying to get home, down through the hay chutes, through the manger to the door of the tack room, which was always base. And I remember Johnny, we'd get up in the loft of the barn and we'd play up there, and then he would take the stairs down, and we'd always put our Jell-O or anything we wanted to keep cold, we'd put it down at the spring. And so he would take the stairs down so we couldn't get out of the loft of the barn, and then he would go get the Jell-O and go get a spoon, and he'd sit out there in front of us and say, "Don't you wish you had some?" And so we always were going to get him, but he always was one step ahead of us. The most prized possession of the younger children and grandchildren was an old baby buggy, and I tell you, that was the most wonderful thing I ever owned. I don't know where we got it, but anyway, they all worked diligently to fashion the shale hills into roadways, complete with bridges over which they traveled miles and miles. We'd take sagebrush and make a bridge, and it was great work. They also moved the playhouse with the buggy. They would load it with cooking utensils, bacon, eggs, and potatoes, and drive into the cedar hills where there were secret rooms that nature had fashioned, and build their fire and have a gourmet meal, partially cooked and seasoned with sagebrush. Finally, we've got in here one by one the wheels fell off, but the wheels stayed on, but all the wicker part of the basket was gone. All we had was the thing you push it with, and the wheels and the metal. The metal was all that was left, but it was a great old buggy. Winnie would help the younger girls fix up the playhouse, complete with linoleum on the dirt floor, and in just a day or two they would decide to move off. They went to the next chosen place, and Winnie'd get so mad at us, she could have slapped us to sleep and slapped us for sleeping because she worked so hard. Gladys used to read to the younger children in the evenings over the bowls of apple and popcorn. Books were traded with neighbors, and Gladys remembers riding horseback to the mailbox and often visited at the home of Josephine Oland. Other good friends were the Bainbricks, the Dixons, Browns, Love, and Boyce families. Gladys was the family nurse, taking care of injuries and bumps. She went on to be a nurse's aide at the Claggett Memorial Hospital in Rifle, working many years as her profession. Among the memories of the Johnson children are those of helping their grandfather break horses, putting one broken horse and one tame one together on the wagon, the tame one teaching the unbroken one what to do. Grandpa Johnson lived in a cabin up the draw from where we lived on the PL Ranch, and how the children loved to visit him and have his cinnamon buns, and I already told that story. He also played the violin, and he'd always play Pop Goes the Weasel, and us kids would laugh because we thought that was so funny when he'd snap it on the strings. Other interesting events remembered by the Johnson children were Dad and the boys robbing the bee trees, and Beverly remembers tubs full of honey and how Annie melted it down to separate the honey from the wax. It really tasted good on hot biscuits. One of Gladys's memories is her graduation from the 8th grade when she and Anna Burke graduated from the Burke School. Marie Harris was their teacher. They rode horseback into Meeker for their graduation, putting their horses in the livery stable and staying in town for a couple of days. When they saddled up for the return trip, Gladys's horse was ready to run, and they had a wild ride out of town for a few miles on their way back to Piance Creek. Pat grew up on Piance Creek and is the only one of the family remaining on Piance. He and his wife, Mary Lou, are ranchers and one of the larger stock growers in Piance Creek area. When Beverly started to high school, Dell and Annie moved to Rifle. This was the family home until Dell passed away on August the 28th, 1955. Annie lived in Rifle for several more years. Then in 1959, she moved to Meeker and lived in her little trailer house. At the age of 91, she has slowed down but still lives alone with her own housework and cooking. Her rose garden was her pride and joy. Annie always has been proud of her children and now has 19 grandchildren, 20 great-grandchildren, and one great-great-granddaughter, and these 3 great-great-grandsons. Annie is a great little lady and is loved by all who know her. This book that I've been reading this from, the name of it is This Is What I Remember, by and about the people of the White River Country, the Rio Blanco County Historical Society in 1978. I will try to start on this part about all my brothers and sisters and tell as much as I know. Ray, of course, was the oldest brother, and I said before that he had passed away in an accident when he worked for Wagner's. But Ray was married to Emma Collins, and I don't remember the year. It was in the 30s sometime. And they lived at different places. Ray worked for out at the Sheridan Ranch, and he worked on construction quite a bit. And then they moved to Denver. And I'm not real sure what he did over there, but that's where they lived until as long as and then Emma passed away, and I don't remember the year of that happening, but they had a great life, and a lot of the summers they would invite Virgie to come over, and she would spend the summer with them, and they would always treat her to buying her clothes for school, and she always enjoyed that. She thought that was great. And I don't have too much about Ray in my growing up years because he was the oldest and I was the youngest. But I know that in the later years, after Emma passed away, several years later, he met Dorothy O'Brien, and they were married, and they had three children: Rhea, Philip, and Phyllis Joe, and Phil and Phyllis Joe were twins. And then as the kids grew older, well, Ray would bring them over to Meeker out Strawberry, where we lived. And my oldest son's birthday was in August the 22nd, and Phil and Phyllis Joe's was the 13th of August. So they'd come over about that time, and we'd always make birthday cakes for the three of them, I guess I should say. And it got to be a yearly tradition that we looked forward to every year, and I got to know more about Ray as we grew older than I did in the younger years. But he was a great brother, and we had a lot of fun together, and he'd come and go hunting. And I remember he wore those tan pants and shirt that matched. I always thought that was so neat. They looked so sharp. Dorothy had two sons, Kevin and Barry O'Brien, and Barry is still living. Kevin has passed away in the recent years. With Ray was that when he was killed at the Wagner construction or company in Denver, since then all the beeps that you hear on the maintainers and any moving equipment, when it backs up, it has a beep tone, and that wasn't put on until after Ray was killed. So they implemented that into the construction workers. And then next is Johnny. And oh my, I don't know what I can say about Johnny. He was something else, I tell you. But I guess I kind of grew up with Johnny because he lived right there nearby. And like I say, there's a lot I don't remember of things of growing up. But Johnny met and married Berlinda Bailey, and they were married in January, but I don't remember the date. I'll put that in at a later time. But then they lived, we lived at the PL Ranch, and then there was a little house where Johnny and Berlinda lived, and then they were next door to the Mager house. And down where they lived was, Mager's had this spring house, and it was a big building that had a wooden chute from the spring that the water ran out of the building, and that's where they kept all their things to keep it cold. And us kids used to go down there, and it was nice and cool in that place, so we'd stay there. And then Johnny and Berlinda had Johnny Sy, and he was a grown man when he was 5 years old. I think he did everything the grown-ups did. He didn't miss a trick. So he was always busy and keeping everybody jumping and going, and he still does. He's in his 70s now, and he's still going strong. So, but Johnny and Berlinda were married quite a few, and I don't remember how many years. And then Berlinda passed away with cancer. And then several years down the road, well, Johnny met Mickey, and they were married, and she was a joy to have around. She brought Johnny to the Lord, and they had a very happy marriage, and they lived over at Denver. Johnny worked on I guess they boarded horses or trained horses, but he was a caretaker for that place, and that's where he had a heart attack and passed away. But he also worked for Velkamp Flowers, and he was the caretaker for all those big hot houses, I guess you call them, where they grew all the plants and everything from start to finish, and selling them. And we used to go, and he'd walk us through the flowers, and so he's probably up there just tricking through the flowers again. But anyway, he was a joy. the kids, Rodney said that's why he can run so fast. His Uncle Johnny would try to catch him to pinch him, and he'd outrun him. And how he pinched. Every kid that ever was around him knows what that pinch felt like. And then he was very superstitious about black cats for years and years, and he'd go out of his way to go around a black cat and not let it cross his path. But then after Mickey brought him to the Lord, he decided that there wasn't anything to it. Okay, Johnny and worked in construction, he and Johnny Sy, and they had a place downriver that was called the White River City. And they lived there for years and years, and then they went into construction business. And one day when they were going to work, well, they took their lunch, and Johnny Sy tells the story about he got into the lunch and he ate it all, and when it came time for Johnny to eat his, there wasn't anything left for him to eat. But then Johnny Sy got a payback on it, because after he was married quite a few years and he was fixing his own lunch, he got what he thought was lunch meat, the canned lunch meat, and it turned out that it was cat food, so he got paid back for what he did. And I'm sure he'll appreciate this story. But Johnny and Johnny Sy worked a lot in uranium too. They worked down in Nevada, and so did Johnny and Johnny Sy, and they worked with Bud Mager, whose dad owned the PL when we lived there. And this one time they were going to fly from Winnemucca, Nevada to Denver, and Johnny was going to ride on the plane back to Denver, and then he started to go, and then he changed his mind and decided he didn't want to go. And that was when Bud Mager was killed up. It was up the upper end of Strawberry Creek, out up Meeker in Rio Blanco County. There were several people on the plane, and so that was a very sad time for everybody, because most everybody in the county knew Bud, and he was a good friend of Pat's, Johnny and Johnny Sy. And they did a lot of different jobs around the country. Johnny did everything. He was always happy. He always laughed and talked to. He was never very down. He was one of the, and I suppose I'll cry again, but he was one of my brothers that I thought would just live forever. I never thought about him ever passing away. I just thought that he was one great brother. And he was. All of my brothers were great, so I can't say enough about what a great family I have lived in, and am still living in. Gladys was the third child, born to Annie and Dell, and she was born September the 24th. I can't remember what year now, but anyway, Mother told the story of when they lived in Texas that she wasn't feeling well, and Gladys was supposed to be taking a nap with her, and she got to playing with Mother's wedding ring on her finger. And when Mother got up, her wedding ring was gone, and she asked Gladys, "What did you do with my wedding ring?" So she took her outside and showed her this real deep crack like they have in Texas, and pointed down in there. And I guess it's probably still there, because nobody could ever find it. And of course, I don't remember anything about Gladys growing up, because because she and Fred were married July the 4th, 1927, after I was born in April. So I remember her as a married lady all her life. And then Fred and Gladys had two children, Barbara and Sam. And Barbara and I are just a year or so apart. So she's always kind of seemed more like a sister than a niece. But anyway, Gladys and Fred used to come to our house after Bob and I got married, and we'd play pinochle. And we just would play and play. And Gladys and Fred came up with this deal. If you didn't want to bid a lot, you just say bid or bunch. And Bob always heard him say, bid a bunch. So he'd bid and he'd go, nothing, we'd always lose. Finally it dawned on us that it was bid or bunch. So that was the story on our pinochle. But we always, that's one thing Gladys and Fred loved to do, was to play pinochle. And they'd come over when we lived up the river. They'd come over and spend the weekend and out Strawberry. But everybody loved to go to Gladys's house because she was such a great cook. I have her recipe for her spaghetti that I used to make the sauce like she did, and now we just take it out of a jar. But the things that she cooked was so good, and she made apple butter. She cooked it in the oven, and it was just always just perfect. I mean, it was never too thick and never too thin. It was just right. It'd stay on your toast, and we loved that. And she had instead of making shortcake like everybody else did, she would toast the bread very lightly and then put strawberries or raspberries or peaches, whichever she had frozen, and then put cream on top of that. And it was so good that you just couldn't sit still while you ate it. And we loved going there. And then she had this big apricot tree in the front yard. And we used to go and pick apricots and can them. And let's see. And then Gladys was, like we said in the book, she worked at the hospital. But before that, she worked for Mr. Beale. And Gladys worked there for I don't know how many years. I don't know if he closed the appliance store down or what happened. But anyway, she worked there for years. And in fact, I've still got the Revere kettle that she bought at that store when Bob and I got married, and that's been close to 60 years ago. So it was a good choice she made. And then after that, she went to work at the hospital. And I remember she was working at the hospital when I went, when I had Rodney, because I had him in Rifle. And but everybody loved to have Gladys be their nurse's aide because she give the best back rubs in the whole state of Colorado, or maybe the whole United States, for all I know. But she was really good, and she was so sweet with everybody, and they loved to have her take care of them. And I don't think they even give you a back rub anymore in the hospitals. I haven't had one for a long time anyway. She made the best prune cake, and nobody else could ever match it. I don't care how hard they tried. I haven't tried recently. I may try that, see if I can do it. But, it was always good. It was always so good. Somebody needs to carry on the tradition of that prune cake. But anyway, she'd do it just right. I can just see her little old hands now, just the way she'd do everything just right. And then she lived over here in Meeker at the Pines for, I don't know, a year or two. And I used to just love that part of it because she called me one day and said, Beverly, I want to move to Meeker. Can you find me a place to live? And I said, well, I'll see what I can find out. I found out they had a room, an apartment down at the Pines, and so she decided to move over here from Rifle. And I think she was very happy all the time with living there. And I'd go down and have lunch with her, and then I was working at the sheriff's office then, so I'd have time in the mornings to go and visit. And she always wore a scarf. She was always the one that had the little prim and proper scarf. She had a certain way of tying it, and she just, it was always so neat. And she had, I don't know how many, I'd say she probably had 25 or 30 at least. And I remember the last, Jenny gave her a scarf, was one of the last ones that she had when she was in the nursing home in Rifle. And as a matter of fact, I believe she had that scarf on when she was buried. But used to enjoy going and visiting with her in the nursing home too. It wasn't like the old times, but she was always happy and always content with where she was. She was like our little mother. She never made a fuss about what was going on or who said what or who did what. She was just a very good Christian lady, and I miss her a lot. And then next is our sister Edith. And Edith was a very prim and proper lady. She was always, everything had to be just so with Edith. She never went out of the house or anywhere unless everything was just right. She was she liked to look nice, and she dressed nice, and that was her way of life. And Edith was married to Mike. I don't know if it was in 1927 or the next year after Gladys and Fred got married, but I think it was in 1928 that they were married, and they moved to, well, Mike was a coal miner. He and his brother mined coal up at Silt, and they, I remember going up there to visit, and Tom, Mike and Edith had two sons. They had Tom, he's about not a whole lot younger than I am. I think he's a year younger than Barbara, maybe, and then Larry. And we went up there, and there was this old man, and I don't know who he was, but us kids were kind of half scared of him because we thought he was going to get us. We must have thought he was a boogeyman. I don't know. But anyway, he'd give us a bad time, and so Edith was making biscuits. And we asked her if we could have some biscuit dough. And she said, "What are you going to do with it?" And we said we was going to eat it. So she gave us a little wad of cooked biscuit dough. And we took that down to that old man's house, and we put it all around the doorknob on his house. Don't ask me why or what we thought we were doing, but that's what we did. So we got that done. And then Mike and Edith lived down in Debec. Mike owned property down there, and the kids went to school there, started their grade school there. And then Mike passed away in about, I don't remember, because Mike and Edith and Waymon and Audie and Roy and Leela all went to Wichita, Kansas to work at Boeing Aircraft. And Mike got sick while they were there, and he came back to Colorado and went to a doctor in Grand Junction. And because I remember him stopping at our place, we lived at the Daig Apartments, and Mother and Dad and I. And he told us then that he had cancer. And he went back to Wichita and was there. I don't know how long he lived after that, but then he passed away in Wichita. And some of the family, I don't know if it was Roy and Waymon or just which one of the family did go back and brought Edith back to Denver. It might have been Ray, too. I don't know. But anyway, then Edith came back to Denver, and she got a job working at Montgomery Ward. And it was real hard for her because she had Tom and Larry. I think Larry was 12, and Tom must have been 14 or 15. And they kind of took care of each other while she worked because she couldn't make enough money to live on. and pay a babysitter for the boys too. But they didn't live very far from the Montgomery Ward store where she worked. And then they managed. I don't know how, but they managed, and I'm sure that a lot of the family helped her. I'm sure that Ray lived over there, so I'm sure he helped on times that he could. And then she met Ross Hurd. And I think Ray knew Ross, and he introduced Edith to her. And Ross was he'd like to go to shooting matches. He had all kinds of guns, and they shot, and then Edith got into it pretty good, and she got to where she was a pretty good shot with a gun too. So, and then a year or so down the road, then they had Sharon, and Sharon was quite a girl. She was here to visit us this spring, she and her husband. But they lived in Denver for all the years. They bought a home and lived on Harlan Street, across the street from the school. So the kids didn't have far to go to school. And then I don't remember what year it was that Ross passed away. He passed away with a heart attack. And so Edith was left alone again. And then she met this other man, and I think he thought that he was going to marry a rich lady, and he wasn't going to didn't have to work anymore. And so somehow Edith found this out, that this is what he was thinking, so she got rid of him in a hurry, because it's enough to take care of herself, she said. So this kind of story kind of came to me from some of her kids, I think. But anyway, then she lived alone there on Harlan Street for quite a while, and then Sharon got married, and then Larry and Judy. Larry married Judy, and they lived in Denver. And Tom, I don't know how he got to California, but he went from Denver to California. Well, he was in the Navy, and maybe that's how he met Wilma, because he met Wilma, and they got married, and they're still married and still live in California. She came over to spend a week over here with us, and that was after Jenny and Sam were married. And before they were married, Jenny never drove a truck, and she never pulled a horse trailer of any kind. And then now she can back up a horse trailer as good as anybody can back up a semi-truck. But anyway, we went to the cow camp, and we had to go up over the Buford-Newcastle Road. And it's it's wide, but it's windy. It wasn't quite as bad as Battle Mountain when the folks came over, but pretty close. But anyway, we got up there, and Edith told Jenny, she said, "I didn't know you could drive a truck like this." And she was just amazed that Jenny could drive it, and she enjoyed that trip a lot. And I was probably one of the last times that she came to Meeker. And then she went into a nursing home, and that's where she lived for several years and then passed away. Then there was Waymon. And I'll probably cry through this because Patty's here, and Waymon was just one of those special people. He had a quick temper. He could get so mad at you that he could just chew you up and spit you out. But he had a manner about him that he could just melt your heart. And I remember when I was young and I was dating these different guys, and this one in particular wanted me to marry him, and I told Waymon, I said, "Waymon, he wants me to marry him, but I don't want to." And he said, "Well, then what are you going to marry him for if you don't? All you have to do is say no." So I said, "Well, that's a good idea." So that's what I told him. And anyway, but anytime I had any problems of any kind, I could always go to Waymon. He'd always kind of help you. And then he married Audie, and Audie was something else. She was more of a sister. It's like a lot of the sisters that I had, and Winnie and Audie they were in school together. They went to high school together. And Winnie was so mad at Audie because she married her brother, because then they weren't friends anymore. They were related. And so, but they were still good friends all through the years. And then Waymon and Audie had Jerry and Patty. And Jerry married Bub Sutton, or I guess I should say Ray Sutton, but we all call him Bub, and he's a big husky guy. He's a great person, and we all think an awful lot of Bub. And he and Jerry have been married. How many years have they been?
They got married in 1958.
So they've been married 48 years. Good grief. And then they had two children, Jay and Tracy. And Tracy lives in Aspen and is doing quite well in her profession. She's rents and sells real estate, and plans vacations for a lot of the celebrities from California. They all come, and she finds them a place to stay, and she's very happy in her life and her little world up there. She loves Aspen. And Jay was killed in a car accident when he was only 8. Was he 18?
No, 16.
16.
16.
He was 16 years old, and that was devastating to the whole family, and we know that it was to Jerry and Bub too. So, and Tracy, it just was a very bad, sad time. And then there's Patty.
There was a street. You want to tell me?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, in Rifle, Jay worked with Brother Johnny in construction, and they built the Buckhorn up in the Buckhorn, I think that's the name of it, subdivision in Rifle. And they named a street after Jay up there. There's Jay Avenue. And you can go up there anytime, and you can see Jay's sign up there on the street. And see, and then Jay has a son, Cameron, that is, how old is he now?
20.
No, he's in his 20s anyway, and he's a very neat kid, and Jerry and Bob are so happy to have him, and they've stayed friends with Cameron's mother all through the years, although she is married and has children of her own with her husband. Well, they're all grandkids to Jerry and Bub. And then, as I said, then there's Patty. And I don't know what I can say about Patty, because she's sitting here and it's just hard to talk about somebody. But Patty always loved horses. She loved the ranch, she loved the country life, and she just loved being around horses. And any time that you couldn't find Patty, if you'd find a horse, she was on it. And they lived in a lot of different places. In fact, they lived down on the Watkins place down here, which we call the Cross L now, but Waymon and Roy both lived down there and worked for Roy Harper. And so Patty's kind of next door to home when she comes here. But then Patty went into was hired on as a dispatcher at Colorado State Patrol in 1970, and has dispatched throughout the years in various places. Her last place was in Houston, Texas. And was that Harris County? She worked in Harris County in Texas, and she'd get on the average of how many 911 calls in a shift?
Probably
300?
probably between 200 or 300.
On the average of 200 to 300 911 calls. She was a 911 operator, and they switched back and forth at different shifts. But and then Patty lived down there until 1999, and then she was driving home from work, and a vehicle hit her and broke her neck, and she was in the hospital for a long siege of it down there. But I got ahead of myself because she did get married back up the line. She married Tom Lewis, and they had one child, Shauna, and they were later, Tom and Patty were later divorced, and Shauna is now 42 years old.
She was born in 65.
So yeah. She's 40, will be 42 next year, and she has 3 children. She has 2 boys, Austin and Travis, and then the little girl, Cheyenne. So Patty is a grandmother 3 times there, and is proud of her grandchildren, as we all are. You know, each one thinks their grandchild is better than the other one. So, but anyway, and then after Patty recovered from her accident, she and her dad, when Waymon passed away in Fruita, well, Jerry and Bub lived there, so Patty moved back to Colorado and decided that Fruita was where she wanted to be so she could be close to her sister, because she and her sister are very close, and Patty loves her very much. The history on Waymon, there should be something that I could tell on him. That
Hunter.
Oh yeah, he was a hunter. He loved to hunt. He had, I don't know how many hunters that had come and go hunting up to their place. And he could just, when he was young, he could pick a deer up and just bring its hind legs and front legs together around his shoulders and carry it off the hill. Seen him do that a lot of times. And then we used to go, I guess you'd call it poaching. We'd go up to Weesey Cow Camp, and just before that, we'd go earlier, and then we'd get to where the deer were, and then we'd, just before dark, and it'd be, and us kids would ride in the back, because of course we couldn't drive, and they weren't about to let us learn, so we'd stand up in the back of the pickup, and when we'd see a deer, we'd bang on the top of the pickup, and they'd stop, and where is it, where is it? Of course, their eyes were pretty sharp, so they could see him, but we had a lot of fun doing that. And that's how we lived. We didn't have, growing up, we didn't have any meat but chickens, and so we'd get tired of chicken, so we'd have venison. And Cleve Gentry was the game warden, the last one that I remember. And he used to come down Piance Creek, but before he'd come down, he'd always stop up at the head of the creek, and we had what we called an operator then, just like we have now, except anything that was going on the creek, well, we had these old-fashioned phones that you ringy ding, and so he'd stop there, and then the lady that lived there would always make 3 long rings, and with everybody on the creek then that heard the 3 rings knew something was happening, so they'd get on the line, and he'd usually say, "Cleve's a-comin'," so we knew what that meant, and if there was anybody that needed to hide their meat, they did. And but there was one lady that they tell the story on, and I'm not sure where she lived or what, but they had this big box of some sort, and she had the meat in there, and then she put a cover over it, and then she sat on it all the time that he was there. And they always wondered if he knew what she was sitting on, but he never did ask, and she never told him. So that was one of the stories that we had. And something I forgot all about, and it was never mentioned in our reading this I remember, was when our house burned. I must have been about 4, maybe 5 when it burned. I can't remember. But I know Mother and Dad and Grandpa Johnson were all sick in bed. And Winnie was taking care of them. Winnie and Waymon were taking care of them. I don't know where Roy and Pat were. But I went up and stayed with Ray and Emma because everybody was sick, and I guess I'd get in the way, and I don't know where Virgie stayed there. Maybe she was in school. She and Pat were probably in school. But anyway, the house burned. It burned everything we had. We didn't have a single thing left. Not even a needle and thread or anything. And all the people on Piance Creek, they were so good, and they all brought stuff. They even brought Mother a needle and thread and buttons and things like that to help, and brought food. And I remember thinking, even at my young age, that what a wonderful thing that was to have friends like that would help you out when times were rough. And then we lived in this little one-room cabin, and I'll tell you what, that was a sight to behold, because on one side we had 2 beds, foot to foot, and then at night we'd pull the beds out, and there was a mattress under each bed, and us kids would sleep. If we were lucky, we'd get sleep in one of the top beds, but most of the time we slept on the floor and on the mattress. And of course, Mother and Dad got the other bed, and we had a fireplace in the corner, but we had a cook stove also, and a table and chairs, and that was about all we had room for in that little cabin. It's still down there. I need to go and look at it one of these days and see if I can get in it. But I remember at Christmas I was so worried because we had the fireplace, and Santa Claus always came down the chimney. You know that, don't you? And I asked Dad, I said, well, how is Grandpa, how is Santa Claus going to get down the chimney, because we got the stove in the way? And he said, oh, don't worry, he'll be able to come down, and if he can't, I'll just knock him in the head with a stick of wood. And I worried about that for I don't know how long it took me to get over that, but I said, oh, don't kill Santa Claus. And so anyway, we did have Christmas. We didn't always have the best Christmases in the world, but we always got one thing, and we always got oranges, and we always got peanuts. And they were in our little old brown socks that we pulled up. They weren't very big, so you couldn't get a whole bunch of stuff in them, but I don't remember of ever having a Christmas that we didn't have Christmas. I remember one time, and I think this is so funny, because Waymon and Audie lived down here on the Watkins place, which is just below where Sam and Jenny live now. And we were down there, and we were going to play pinochle, but Audie and I decided to make, I don't know if we was making tortillas or if we was making noodles. I can't remember, but I kind of think it was tortillas, because either one ever made them before. And we were trying to figure out how to get them rolled out so they'd be thin enough. And I said, well, Audie, why don't we run them through the wringer of the washing machine? And Audie says, hey, Bev, that's a good idea. We'll just do that. So we put the dough on a piece of wax paper and flattened it out as much as we could, and we ran it through. Well, of course, there was enough moisture in the tortillas or the noodles, whichever it was, and it mashed the oil paper, and so therefore we had all of this stuff stuck to the wringer of the washing machine, so we had to get that all cleaned off. But that was another one of our funny times. But Audie and I used to have some great times, and we played an awful lot of pinochle. We were kind of, I guess the Johnson family is kind of the pinochle family because we just played. Audie worked up at Redstone Lodge. She cooked up there was it one summer, Patty, or just one whole summer? And she wasn't supposed to take any recipes from up there because they told her that she couldn't. But I have one. I don't know where I got it, but I have one. And then another neat thing that Audie did was that she cooked for Elliot and Minowa Roosevelt up at when it's upriver about where you turn off to go on the Buford Newcastle Road, but it was called the Barbell then because the Bell family owned it, and so they called it the Barbell. And Elliot Roosevelt was married to Minowa Bell, and then Eleanor would come out and spend summers out there, and this particular summer was when Audie worked there, and Eleanor gave Audie it looks kind of like a dove, what we see as a dove, but it was a turquoise colored bird. Audie had that all this time, and now Patty has the bird in her possession, so that is neat that Audie got to work up there. And of course there wasn't anybody, well, maybe next to my little mother, that could cook like Audie could. Audie was a wonderful cook, and we always loved to go to Audie's house and eat. And I didn't tell what a good cook my mother was, but mother could make a meal out of nothing. And I think that's where Audie learned it, because Audie was so young when she and Waymon got married that she learned a lot of her tricks of the trade from mother, so that was good too. And then Jerry and Bub worked for the Division of Wildlife, and they lived at Red Feather Lake up by Fort Collins, out of Fort Collins. And it was one winter when they lived there that I don't know how old Jay and Tracy were, but they were probably 6 and 8 maybe, or something like that. And anyway, they went out on the ice and Tracy fell through. And with Jay's quick thinking, well, he ran to the house and told his mom and dad, and Jerry and Bub and Waymon and Audie were there too. And they all went down and saved Tracy. It was just by the grace of God, I guess, that they saved her, because it was deep, and Tracy has told Patty that it was so dark she was scared to death that she would never come up. And so we just praise the Lord that she was saved. Patty just told me that Elliot Roosevelt was one of the first narrators for the Meeker Massacre up here in Meeker, and they do that every year, and that was the beginning of putting on the reenactment of the Meeker Massacre. And it happened down here in the field just below, well, it was on the Watkins place then, but when it was first started, and then Sam and Jenny owned it, and then they have since sold it. But anyway, that's where the Ute Indians had their racetrack, and Mr. Meeker tried to plow it up, and they didn't like it, so that was an Indian uprising. That Marshall Sprague wrote was, he told about the Meeker Massacre, and also Brother Wayman's name is in that book. Uncle Roy, in this, he'd be number 6, I guess, wouldn't he? Number 6 on the totem pole. So we got Roy, and Roy's a special brother too. Each one of my brothers are special in their own special way, and Roy and I have been close all through the years. We've lived pretty close together all of most all of our life, because I can remember growing up on Piance, and Roy was always there. And he and Waymon and Pat were the ones that, and Johnny. Johnny and Pat were the cowboys, and Waymon and Roy were the rancher farmers that helped. They helped Dad with the hay and feeding the cattle, and Roy didn't get to go to school. It seems that he got a job and rented a place in Rifle so that Winnie and Pat would have a place to stay, and he paid the rent for them so they could go to school. Roy married Leila Barrow. She was from Debec, and I don't remember the year they got married, but they were married and have one son, and it's Rex Leslie. And as I said earlier in Wayman's, that Roy and Leila went to Wichita, Kansas with all of them and worked in the Boeing aircraft there. I don't know just what part each one of them played, but they all had their own special job. And I didn't mention the fact that Waymon did a lot of tool and die work and things there that a lot of the bosses and the engineers asked him how to do certain things that he did. And I think Roy was right in there with him. I think they kind of worked together on that. Roy worked with Johnny and Johnny Sion in construction for quite a long while. He was up at Leadville with them, and he helped build the Rio Blanco Lake down here, which is still there. And Roy and Rex went to Texas. Well, he was going to apply for a job on the King's Ranch, but I think he told that in his interview. But then they came back, and Mother had gone down with them, and then she came back, and they bought a trailer house and moved to Meeker. And I don't know. Rex, I guess Rex was in the Navy when they moved back to Meeker. That was why Rex wasn't here. And Mother and Roy lived in that little trailer. Roy was one of our family that he couldn't stand to be alone, and so he was married numerous times. And but the love of his life was Margaret, and still is. Margaret's in the nursing home now, and here in Meeker, she has Alzheimer, and Roy's in the nursing home in Denver. And it's not an easy time for him, and he's glad that he's being taken care of and that Margaret is, but if they could just be together, it would be good. But Rex and Kathy watch over him and take good care of him, and he's happy where he is and what he's doing. Roy is a very gentle and very kind person, and he's a very special brother too. Like I said before, each one is a brother is a different, but yet they're all alike. They're my brothers. Hummingbirds. He had I don't know how many hummingbird feeders. It kept him busy, keeping them all filled, because he thought it was a neat idea to begin with, because it was. And then he had to fill them all, and then his arms got to bothering him, and he couldn't raise his arms up to hang up the bird feeder, so that kind of had to go to the wayside. And then he and Margaret always had a wonderful garden. He had a rototiller, and he'd get out there and just rototill that garden, and they'd plant and grow and dig and feed and bring us lettuce and all kinds of stuff out of their garden. They'd bring it to Jenny a lot of times, and and then I'd wash it and the spinach and all of that. We just, it was great having all the fresh vegetables. Roy and Winnie and Pat, I guess, were all involved in Bob Reagan's car. It was real dusty on Piance Creek. I mean, of course, we didn't have gravel, and it was just a dust pocket all the way up and down. And they decided that they'd wash his car and make it shine. It was a black car. And I don't know, I think they took axle grease. I'm not real sure of what it was, but they took some kind of grease and just put it all over that car, and it just shone like $1 million. It just, they thought they had just really done something neat. Well, he drove the car up the creek in the mud, or not the mud, but the dust, and it just covered that car with dust, and it just is a terrible mess. Well, he told Dad that he said, "Would you please ask the kids not to do that again?" And that was when Roy got, I don't even like to repeat what he got, but I think everybody knows, and I just am going to leave that part of it out. But he has forgotten it, I'm sure. I mean, he remembers it on occasions, but I think he probably forgave his dad a long time ago, and all is well. So, and he was quite a photographer too, come to think of it. I hadn't thought about that, but he always had a camera. And everybody'd see Roy coming. Oh, here comes Roy with his camera. And then when we wanted a picture of somebody, we'd ask Roy, "Hey, Roy, have you got a picture of so-and-so?" Because we don't have one. But he got one of the first video cameras, I think, in the family. And he just, well, when he first got it, it was rather sickening. Because every time he'd show a picture, it was up and down and up and down. And you couldn't, you just, you'd get dizzy watching it, and yet you enjoyed it. But it was great because he videoed everything and everybody, the ground. He did Sam and Jenny's wedding. He did a very good job on that, except when he's walking away from it and he'd get the ground. But he was videoing wondering why the state patrol car was at Sam and Jenny's wedding, because they thought he was after somebody. But Rob Boffman was a good friend of Jenny's and mine when we worked at the sheriff's office, so that was all right. He was on duty, so he just came out to the wedding and celebrated with us, and then he went back to work. But anyway, and then like I say, he took pictures of everything. He took pictures of the deer. There was always deer down there around their place. We had one little brother that was born between Roy and Waymon, and I have the dates of when he was born and when he died, but he had diphtheria and died at a very young age. I don't think he was even 2 years old when he died. And so he never got to grow up and be a part of this great big famous family that we've got now. So is Winnie. And what can I say about Winnie? I don't know. I don't know where to start. But Winnie was one of my favorite people. She was always there. It seemed like I can remember Winnie from, she's probably one of my first memories. And no doubt she'll probably be one of my last. I don't know, but we were, besides being sisters, we were best friends. And Winnie worked up at Woods Lake, and that's where she met Bill. And oh my, Bill was something else. He was the most handsome man, and he thought Winnie was the most beautiful girl, and so needless to say, they fell in love and got married. And they went to Moab, Utah to get married. And They right not too long after they were married was when World War One or two came, and Bill went into the service, and he was gone for I don't know, 3 years, I guess, something like that. They'd been married about maybe 3 or 4 when he went into the service, and then they were married 12 years before they ever had any kids, and they didn't think they was ever going to have any. And then, boy, were they surprised. They had Judy and Debbie and Bill and Kurt, and that was enough. they, and they're a wonderful family, all of them. But to get back to when we were growing up, I think one of the reasons, well, not one of the reasons, but one of the things that stands out most in my mind with Winnie was I had said earlier that Virgie went summers and spent summers with Frey and Emma, and they always bought her real neat clothes for Christmas or for school. And I remember they bought her a pair of jodhpurs, and I guess everybody knows what jodhpurs are. They're pants, but they've got a kind of bloom out on the side. And Virgie thought she was Mrs. King Tut with those because they were just great. Well, I couldn't let her outdo me, so I would put on Pat's bib overalls, and I'd wrap the legs on my legs, and then I'd pull the pants up so they bloomed out just like hers, and I had just what she had. But anyway, that was just one of those funny things. And then one summer, I was going to say why Winnie was so special. She worked all one summer in the hayfield. I don't know how much she made. It was very little, I'm sure, but all the money that she made that summer, she bought me school clothes. And I remember having these little patent leather black shoes, and oh my, we could put grease on them and make them shine. and but they were so neat. And I had my first silk panties. I remember that, and they felt so good on my body. and I don't remember how many dresses she bought me, but she bought quite a few dresses. And so I had school clothes that year because Dad worked hard for the money he made, and he didn't have enough to go around. And another thing I forgot that I'm thinking of now, that's when I should have told when I was talking about Waymon and Audie, but Audie made me a dress, and I'd forgotten about that. But it was green. I don't know how I got a green dress, but anyway, she made this green dress, and it was so neat. But it had horses for buttons, and I always loved that dress. I don't know what happened to it. I wish I had it. Back to Winnie, we have always we'd always done things together, and the kids every summer they'd come out, especially Judy and Debbie and Bill, because Kurt was a little younger than the rest of them, and they'd come out, and Judy and Debbie were just enough older than that they could take care of Jenny, and Jenny was just a baby, and they would dress her. They'd dress her in one thing, and then they'd take that off, and they'd put something else on her, and they just kept changing her clothes all day long. But they had a ball, and so did we, and Bill and Rodney always had fun playing and running the country, and as luck would have it, we didn't have any rattlesnakes then. With the kids ran all over those hills and never did see a rattlesnake. Then Judy is married to Jody Kessler, and they have 2 daughters, Seda and Kara. Kara has twins, a boy and a girl, and Seda has Tanner. He's 5. He's just starting to go to preschool. And then Debbie has married Alan Traherne, and they have Laura Lee, and I can't say enough about Laura. She's a very special girl. And she has 3 children. She has Casey, that's 14, and Ty, that's 10 or 12. And they were through having children. So they thought, but the good Lord had other plans. And then they had little Jamie, and she's 2 now. And she's the joy of their life. They just don't know how they ever got along without her, but she's a real precious little girl. And then Bill's kind of took after Uncle Roy. He'd been married 3 times. And he married Marla, and they had TJ. And then they divorced, and he married Lois. And he and Lois had Hillary. And Hillary's a real sweet girl. She's going to college down at Mesa College. And then Lois and Bill got a divorce, and he married Sonny. Sonny Stead from Rifle. And they have since divorced, so he's on his own now. He's doing construction and lives over at Denver and works for Lawrence Construction over there. He's worked for several different places and companies, but I think he's happy with where he is. And then there's Kurt, and he's just a big teddy bear. I love Kurt. He's such a sweetheart, and Lucy is too. And Kurt and Lucy have Josh and Garrida and Kelsey and Trey. And of course Trey used to be the baby, and he still is, I guess, but he's about 6 foot tall and is in high school, so they don't have any little ones around anymore. They're in school, but they're not little. And Kurt went to Delta and went to the law enforcement school down there, and was going to be in law enforcement, and then it changed, and he got a job as a security guard in Rawlins, Wyoming, and they were there for a while, and then they went to Riverton, and he's now head of security at it's a honor camp or honor prison or what in Riverton. I guess I've told you about all the kids and what they're doing. Garrida, Kurt's oldest daughter, is in the service. She's in the National Guard and is supposed to be shipped to Iraq in January, I think they told me. And Kelsey is a senior in high school, and Trey is a sophomore. And Winnie was always known as Hot Granny. She had a GTO Pontiac, and it's bright red with a white top, and anytime anybody saw that coming, they knew Hot Granny was on the way. And everybody liked to have her come and visit with them. And one of the reasons they liked to have her come so well was because she always cleaned their refrigerators. Nobody ever had a clean refrigerator, according to Winnie, because if she looked in it and she couldn't find what she wanted, she took everything out and put it back to suit herself. In fact, Jenny has a picture of her clean refrigerator that Aunt Winnie cleaned. And at her services, there was a lot of people that stood up and told about Winnie cleaning their refrigerator. So she always kept mine in order, because Winnie, after Bill passed away in 1977, well, she kind of came and lived with me. And that's where she called home anyway, and her mailing address was there. She didn't always stay there, but she stayed with me. And my refrigerator was always clean. And my clothes were clean because she loved to do laundry, so that was good. And she'd had all these sayings. You shut up or I'll slap you to sleep and slap you for sleeping. And then another story I forgot is when we were kids on Piance Creek, we didn't have candy, and but we used to make a lot of fudge. Winnie was a good fudge maker. And we'd stand around and watch her beat the fudge so it just dying to get a bite of it. We wanted to eat it. And this one time, Virgie kept saying, I want a bite. I want a bite, Winnie. I want a bite. And Winnie took that hot spoon and slapped her right in the mouth, and oh, Lordy, it blistered her mouth. And that was the last time that anybody ever wanted anything out of a hot pan Winnie had. So we decided that wasn't such a good thing, but she wasn't really that mean. It was just one of those times that it just hit her, and she decided she'd put an end to it, I guess. Bob passed away in 1976, and Bill passed away in 1977. So we kind of, as the saying goes, we kind of hooked up together, and we took a lot of trips. We had more fun on these trips. We just go. Well, of course, I was working at the sheriff's office, and so we'd have to plan our time around my days off. But remember one time we were going to Elko, Nevada, to see Debbie and Alan, and Debbie had drawn the map so that we could get our way through Salt Lake. Well, Winnie was telling me where to go. That's one time she got to tell me what to do. And we were supposed to be, I found out later, in the right-hand lane. Well, needless to say, we missed the right-hand lane, and we were going. I said, oh, Winnie, we missed it. And she says, well, back up, stop and back up. I said, Winnie, look behind us. Oh, Lord, the cars were just thick in Salt Lake City. Well, we finally found a place we could get off. But if you ever get off, it's awful hard to find a way to get back on again, I'll tell you. We spent a whole hour in Salt Lake City trying to find somebody that could tell us how to get back on that highway. And finally we went in this parking lot, and we decided that there was these two guys standing over there, and we thought they looked pretty smart. So we went over to them and asked them if they had any idea how we could get back on that highway. I don't know, Highway 40 or whatever it is that goes through Salt Lake. Well, they told us, so we figured they were pretty smart. We got back on the highway, and then it was dark before we got into Elko because we'd lost all that time. But we had some, I tell you, I wish I'd have wrote a book, because we had some great times. And we used to have so much fun at Halloween. We'd dress up. This one year we dressed up like hookers and put on a mask, and we went uptown, and Rodney called the cops and said, there's a couple of hookers running the streets, and he said, I wish you'd pick them up. Well, I tell you, I don't know how we missed them. I mean, I don't know how we knew to get out of the way, because we didn't know Rodney was doing this. And we were just tricking all around. So anyway, we had a blast doing that. But anything we did, we had fun, because it was just one of those things that we did. There were several in the family that got these poodles. Mother got Jock. Winnie had one. I can't remember what they called it, and it got run over in Craig and got killed. And Bob and Virgie had one named Cherie Suzette. But to get back to Jock and Grammy, Mother loved that dog. I think she loved it as much as she did her kids, really, because he was her companion. He just was, and a lot of us thought he was didn't, but we kind of liked him because Mother did. But Mother went to Texas, and she left the dog when he was in Rifle, and I never have figured out why she didn't leave the dog with me, but she didn't. She left it with Winnie. And Winnie got tired of messing with the dog, so she gave it away. Well, the fit hit the shan when Mother got back, I'll tell you. Where is Jock? Well, and so she told Winnie, she said, you go get that dog, and you bring it back right now. Because she was mad. Oh, she was mad. And she brought that dog home to Meeker, and she brought it out. I took her out to my house. And that dog was so matted and so dirty that I'd stick my finger under his mats on his fur, and I'd take the scissors and just clip a hair at a time. Finally Mother was mad. And Winnie knew it. She spent a lot of years making that up to Granny. Winnie moved back to Wyoming after I retired, because we were gonna buy a fifth wheel together. In fact, we got it picked out, and we were making payments on it. And then we were going to travel. We was going to get us a pickup, and we was going to travel in this fifth wheel. And then it ended up that Winnie bought my share out, and she lived in it. She took it to Wyoming, and she lived in it for quite a while. And then she got a trailer house and put it out where Bill lives in Pavilion. And she lived there, and I used to go up 2 or 3 times in the summer and spend time with her. Especially after I retired, I'd go up and then she called me one day and said she wanted me to call the Rifle VA nursing home and see if I could get her in there. And so I called, and they said if she can be here by the 16th of March, she can have a room. So Judy and Sonny loaded her up and moved her to Rifle. And Bill was off working somewhere, and somewhere along the line somebody neglected to tell Bill, and he wasn't very happy about it. But anyway, she lived in the VA nursing home for quite a while, and in fact she practically ran the place because everybody there loved her. Everybody knew Winnie. She had these hats, and she wore these baseball caps, and she had the job of clipping all the dead petunias off of the petunias in the summertime. They even let her keep a pair of scissors on her walker so she could go around and clip all the dead flowers. And then Sonny gave her a tree. I think it was Sonny that gave her the tree. And then every occasion that came along, well, we'd send her things to put on this tree. One of them, of course, was Broncos, like this. We had put all these Bronco things on, and then at Christmas time, I remember I was in Denver, and I bought all of this stuff to put on her tree. And then Laura Lee would decorate the tree for her. And then at Easter, she'd put Easter things in, and it was just and then I remember making a calendar for Winnie. I put all the birthdays, everybody's birthday, and then I'd get scriptures out of the Bible and put on certain days. But I had something almost every day, and then it would mark the birthday and I think the nurses got as much of a kick out of the calendar as Winnie did, because she liked it. But then it was getting kind of along when things weren't going so good for Winnie, and she was failing pretty fast there. And so then in October of 2005, well, she passed away. Next on the list is Pat, and he's my little big brother, I guess. He's closer to my age than any of the rest of them, but growing up we used to have some good times. And Pat was, no, I guess Winnie, I forgot to say that in Winnie's, that Winnie was the first one in the family to graduate from high school. And then Pat was the second. And he stayed with Gladys and Fred and went to high school. And then, like I say, Roy had got an apartment too, so that I don't know if they spent all the time in the apartment or at Gladys's, but I don't know how it worked out. But anyway, I remember that Mother was saving money to buy Pat's class ring. I think it cost the whole sum of $12. But during hunting season, well, Virgie and I would make it a special point that we could open a gate, and maybe one of the hunters would give us a nickel or a dime or something for opening the gate for them. And so that helped us make money, and we donated that to Pat's class ring. And we always thought that was pretty neat that we'd helped our big brother. Pat and Mary Lou got married the year I graduated from high school, so I guess that was probably in 1947, 45, somewhere along in there. And they had Sally Lou, and she was always a joy. When Bob was sick, well, Pat and Mary Lou Bob was bedridden for 6 years. I don't know if anybody knows that or knew that at the time, but Pat and Mary Lou always brought us the beef. They didn't just bring the beef, they had it butchered and packaged and brought it ready to put in our freezer, and we greatly appreciated it. And I always thanked them dearly for it, because I don't know how we would have made it sometimes without their help. And it was great. And then Mary Lou got sick, and things didn't go so good for Pat then. I mean, it was a sad time, and Pat and I got to talking. We'd talk almost every day, and we still do. And it's nice to know that he'll call me if I don't call him, and we tell jokes and stories and just have a great time now, just hashing over old times or new times or whatever. But we talk for 20 minutes and not tell each other anything. That I told him, if I told him everything I knew, then he'd know as much as I did. So I tried not to tell him everything I knew. And so we do have a lot of fun. And then Sally married Tim Schultz, and they have two fine young people, Ty's married and has Jenny, and they're expecting their first baby in December. And Andy got married to John here just a month ago, I think, a month or 6 weeks ago. They were married in Trinidad and live in Denver. And Ty and Jenny live in Seattle, I think, or San Francisco. And so they're Ty always comes every year to go hunting with his buddy. He always calls Pat Buddy, so that was, his nickname from the time Ty was big enough to talk, I guess. And he's been very close to Ty and Andy both, so that makes it nice. And now he'll be a great grandpa, so he's delighted. We used to spend a lot of time trying to knock down swallow nests on those old cliffs on the backside of over there. They'd build those nests, and we'd throw rocks at them to knock them down, which wasn't very nice because we'd kill the birds, but they weren't very nice to build in our territory either. And Pat was always a cowboy. He always liked to ride the horses, and he's still a cowboy. He's one of the best cowmen in Rio Blanco County, I imagine, or maybe Colorado for all I know. But he's been a great brother, a great husband, and a great father, and he'll make a great granddad, and he'll make a great grandpa. So I love you, Pat. See, now Virgie. Let's see, what can I say about Virgie? She was one of my special people too. We were very close. We grew up together, and we did just about everything together until we got older, but we were always in on the moving of the playhouses that Winnie worked so hard to help us put together, and we'd work hard to tear them apart. But it was just the typical thing to do. We'd get tired of living in one place, so we'd move to another. And we had an outside privy, and it was only a two-holer. But Barbara'd come in the summertime, and usually Virgie and Barbara'd gang up against me, but sometimes I could hold my own and sometimes I couldn't. But anyway, we'd always go out to the two-holer, and of course they'd run faster than I did, and they'd get out there, and then I wouldn't have any place to sit. So I'd have to stand outside waiting cross-legged till they got through with what they were doing. And then we played a lot of games, and we helped Mother in the garden. We'd pull weeds and gather eggs and milk cows, and we just had a great time. And then Virgie, when she was, well, it was the year I graduated from high school, or before I graduated from high school, that she married George Mulvaney. And he was a lot older than she was, and that didn't turn out to be too good of a marriage. They ended up, she was working at the John Deere place in Rifle, and George worked there too, I think, and then they got a divorce, and he went to Craig, and then she met and married Jack Collins, and that didn't last either. So then she met Bob Williamson, and they got married in 1954, in June the 19th, 1954. The reason I can remember that is that was the year that Rodney was born, and the doctor didn't think I should go to the wedding because of going over the past, so I didn't get to go to their wedding. But they got married without me, and we're happy for 44 years, so I guess that was good. And then, let's see, Jenny was 6 years old, I think, when Virgie got MS. I can't remember how old Virgie was, but I connect it with Jenny because she had and of course my Jenny was named after Virgie. We always called her Virgie, but Bob called her Jenny, and that was good. And they unfortunately could never have any children, so they just had each other, and they were very happy for years. And Bob was really great with Virgie because he took care of her through thick and thin, and it was a hard time for him, to all he went through and what she went through. But anyway, I used to go and stay with them and visit with them, and they played pinochle, and they had a hotel in Loveland. They lived over there for, forget how long they lived there. I don't remember how long they had the hotel. But Virgie tells the story about the old guy that he'd lived in that hotel for years, I guess, before they bought it, and then he was still living there. And one day he came up to the desk and he said, "Mrs. Williamson, I'm going to move." And I don't know what his name was, but Jenny says, "Well, why are you moving?" And he said, "Well, because I found a place that's cheaper, that I can live cheaper." And Virgie said, "Well, that's okay." She said, "If you have to." She said, "That's your prerogative." And he said, "My what?" And she said, "That's your prerogative." And he said, "Well, if I've got a prerogative, then I'm not leaving." And so he stayed. He was still there when she left. So I always thought that was kind of a funny story.
She taught you how to spell, didn't she?
Oh, yes, that's right. I forgot that. She taught me how to spell. And I thought she was the smartest sister I ever had. And I had 4 before her, but I tell you. And I used to ask her how to spell different things. And so this one day I said, Virgie, how do you spell machinery? And she said, M.A. Shacarini. And I thought, boy, now she's smart, because that's a pretty big word, you know. And we used to laugh about that for a long time. And then she was always divide stuff. If we had a bowl of anything, she'd said, well, I'll put a knife across here, and you eat out of one side, and I'll eat out of the other. Well, it took me quite a while to figure out that when I took a bite, it ran under the knife into her side. And she usually ended up with more to eat out of that bowl than I did. But anyway, and we had an old phonograph. It was taller than I was, because I had to stand on a chair to get up to it. And we had these records, and we'd play that thing, and Dad just got to where he couldn't stand that record player. So it had a crank. And so Dad took the crank and hit it. I never did know what he did with it. But anyway, I'd stand on the chair, and I'd run my finger around to make the record go round and round. Sometimes it would, you know. Anyway, we had a lot of fun, and my finger'd get tired while Virgie'd do it. And then let's see, there's so many things that Virgie and I did that it just, I can't remember all of them. But we were like Winnie. We were good friends as well as sisters, and we were very close. And then she got cancer and she passed away in April and was buried on my birthday. Bob was at work. He was a electrical. He did all the electric wiring for a lot of those high-rise buildings in Denver, and he was very good at his job. And this one day, Virgie was sitting there, and she said, just all of a sudden, she just started praying for Bob. It was just about almost noon, and she just started praying and praying. And when he came home that night from work, she said, what happened to you today just before noon? And he said, I was walking along under some scaffolding, and somebody dropped a 2x4. And he said that 2x4 came down and landed just right beside him. And he said that must have been when you was praying for me, because he said it didn't hit me. And so that made them they were a believer anyway, but it made them a true believer of God, that he watched out for them. Virgie was a very meticulous person. She liked everything. She had a place for everything, and everything in its place, and you didn't disrupt it or move it. It stayed there. And anyway, then after Virgie passed away, well, Bob and I traveled together. We were brother and sister traveling, and we had a really good time. We went to Oregon twice, and we went to Arkansas to see Johnny and Pat, and we went to Wichita, Kansas, and visited down there, and that's when Bob had met this lady in Denver at church, and they had become very good friends, and then they decided that they were more than friends. So we were in Wichita, Kansas, and and Bob called her and talked to her, and that's when they decided that they determined, I guess, I wouldn't say they decided, but they determined that they were in love. So we had to take Bob to the airport to catch a plane out of Wichita, Kansas. He couldn't wait another few days till I was ready to go. So he went off and left me down there. He caught the plane and he flew back. Then he called a day or so after he got back, and he said, well, I want you to be the first to know that Sandy and I are getting married. And I said, well, congratulations. I'm happy for you. And so then I stayed on, maybe another week or so with Johnny and Pat, and then Then come time for me to go home. And there was nobody to go home with me. I was in Winfield, Kansas, 700 miles from Denver. So I said, well, Lord, we can do this. So Johnny and Pat got me all loaded up, and I started out at 7 o'clock that morning, and I got on this road, and I drove, and I thought, Lord, we're not going the right direction. So I pulled off, and sure enough, I got on the wrong road. I was headed east. so anyway, I stopped at this place, and this lady said, well, go up to the toll road up there and ask that guy up there. She said, you're going to have to pay to get on the toll road anyway somewhere, so you might as well do it there. And he'll get you on the right road. So I said, okay. So I got on that road, and he said, and then you'll hit I-70. So, well, I drove, and I couldn't find I-70. I kept hitting these detours. And finally, they got me straightened out, and I got going, and then I just pulled off the side of the road on one of these exits, and I just stopped. And I said, what do I do now? And this car came up behind me and pulled in front of me. And I thought, oh dear, what's going to happen now? But it was this little lady. And she got out, and she came back, and she said, honey, are you lost? And I said, what gave you the first clue? She said, well, your license plate's for one thing, and you being alone. She said, I thought, she doesn't know where she's going. And I said, well, that's very true. I said, you must be my guardian angel. And she said, well, you follow me, and when I get to where you're supposed to turn, well, I'll put my arm out the window, and you turn. Okay, so I followed her for quite a ways. Well, then she put her arm out the window, but it was too late. I had already got by that, so I went up and turned around and come back and got on the road. And I was cussing Bob Williamson all the way because I thought he could have at least stayed there and showed me how to get out of that place. Well, then I got going again, and I got into some more detours. And I pulled up at this other exit. And I looked in the mirror, and here come this car, and it pulled up beside me and stopped and said, you're from Colorado? And I said, yes. And they said, well, so are we. Follow us. So they pulled out, and boy, I stayed right on their tail, I'll tell you. I didn't let them. And then they got out on I-70, and they slowed down, and I went on, and I said, thank you, Lord, and thank you, Colorado, because I was never so glad to see I-70 in my life. And then I got into Denver, and well, almost to Ward Road. I knew where I was when I got to Ward Road, and I was going to Rex and Kathy's, and they live out on Welch Court. And it started to rain, and I tell you, it just literally poured. It was like the sky just opened up, and all that water was coming down there, and I thought, oh, dear Lord, what am I going to do now? And I could just barely see the taillights on these vehicles in front of me, and it was still daylight. I couldn't, and I went by Ward Road, and I thought, now I know where I am. So then I got a little farther to Indiana, and I knew I had to turn off there to go to Rex's. And I got to Indiana. It quit raining. The sun came out. It was so bright I couldn't hardly see. And so I got on the track to Rex and Kathy's and pulled in there. I was never so glad to get parked in my life. But that was the longest day, all by myself. I thought, oh, dear Lord, I'm sure glad I've got you. So anyway, then they took me out to a Mexican restaurant, and I had a margarita, and I felt pretty good. And then, let's see, that's kind of more about me than it was Virgie, but anyway, I guess that was where I got off on Bob there. But anyway, Bob and Sandy got married on August the 1st. And what year did they get married? I can't remember what year they got married. But anyway, they're very happy, and I'm happy for them, because if Bob's happy, I'm just tickled to death. And Sandy had 2 grown children, and they both are married, and they both have had, since he and Bob and Sandy got married, well, each of the kids have had 2 children. So he's a grandpa, and he's very happy, and that's great, because there's nothing like having grandkids. So I guess that's the end of that story. Not the end of it, but the termination of what I'm saying. Then I guess the only one left is me. Little old me, and I think I've told about everything there is to know about me. I wondered where that was. Let's see. Like I say, I was born, up here on the wall is a picture of the house I was born in. I was born up Rifle Creek in a little log cabin. And one day Waymon and Audie and I were out driving around, and we went by that cabin, and Audie said, we better take a picture of it, because one of these days somebody's going to tear it down, and then we won't get one. And sure enough, they did tear it down not too long after that. But it was a little log cabin, and that was the first time I remembered seeing it. There wasn't a tree in front of it when I was born, so that shows you how much a tree grows in the 20 years I've been living. And so was the 3rd one to graduate from high school. And the ironic part about it all is that we all graduated from Rifle High School. We all went to school there and graduated. And if you really want to know, it's been 61 years since I graduated. But in 1948, I met Bob Shaw. We always called it the potato cellar. They had potatoes stored down in the underground there, and they had a dance floor on top. And I went to this dance with Winnie and Bill. We went to Silt, and I met Bob. And that was the beginning of all of that history there is to tell. And we decided, after we'd been going together a while, we'd get married in the first Sunday in April, which turned out to be the 4th of April. And so we got married in Rifle, and Gladys stood up with me. And a friend of Bob's from Meeker was the best man, and he turned out to be our son Rodney's, one of Rodney's best friends too, as well as his dad's best friend. So what year? 48, I think we got married. I can't remember. It's been too long ago. And then we were married 7 years before we had Rodney, and I thought never was going to have any kids, and I was really devastated because... And then all of a sudden, I guess the good Lord thought maybe after 7 years he could trust me with the baby, so we had Rodney, and I think that was, was an amazing time. It was a wonderful... And then not only that year that Rodney was born, but there was a whole herd of other kids that were born that year too. In July was Sherry, which is Johnny Cy's daughter. And then the 13th of August was Philip J. and Phyllis Joe, which are the twins. And then on the 22nd of August, Rodney was born. And then on the 4th of September, or 2nd of September, Wayne was born. So that was the year of the kids, I guess. Granny had all those great-grandkids. And anyway, Rodney was the joy of our life for quite a while. And then, lo and behold, 5 years later, they had Jenny. And I was determined that I wasn't going to have another boy. That it never crossed my mind that she wasn't going to be a girl. I don't know what I'd have done if she hadn't have been. But anyway, I guess I'd have loved her in spite of herself. Himself. But anyway, then we lived out Strawberry. We bought the ranch out there and lived out there. The kids grew up there and both went to high school and graduated from the Meeker High School. And all the years that we lived there, every time they'd go outside to play, I'd say, watch for snakes, watch for snakes. Well, they thought it was a broken record, but I just couldn't not tell her, tell them to watch. Well, finally, after several years of not seeing any, then that one year they saw a whole bunch of them. So I made a believer out of them finally. And then, we had some great times out there. Oh, yeah. Speaking of rattlesnakes, I was... Everybody's picking their feet up so they won't get any snake. But Bob did custom combining, and instead, rather than him come home and milk the cow, well, I would go home in the evening and milk the cow. And this one evening I'd gone and milked her, and then I was coming back, and I saw this rattlesnake in the road. And I had a .22 pistol in the glove compartment, so I thought, well, I've got my chance. Here's my chance. If I can kill that snake, I can kill anything. So I got out with this, and here this stupid thing just came right at me, and I was standing there, and I was just going like this with that gun. And I pulled the trigger, and wham, the snake was dead. I shot him right in the head. Well, then come to find out, I was bragging about my good shot that I'd killed it, and this guy at the gas station said, didn't you know that rattlesnakes line up with anything you point at them? They'll line up with it. He said, that's why you killed a snake. And I said, it isn't either. But anyway, that was my first experience with killing a rattlesnake. So I didn't. And then Jenny and Rodney and I used to take Rodney in for baseball practice from out there, and we'd kill him with the tire chains. I'd throw the chains and hit it, and then we'd take the next, and it'd crawl out from under there, and then we'd hit it with the next ones, and rocks. The kids would throw rocks, and so they learned that there were rattlesnakes on Strawberry. And then they used to ride their bikes all over. I mean, they had roads that I saw later that I tell you what, I was sorry I ever looked, but they had a blast. And Bob was a good wheat farmer. He increased his amount of wheat per acre by about 45, 50 bushels to the acre from what it was when he first started. So he was a good farmer, and he loved to combine, and he worked for the county until he got sick. And then when he got sick, he was bedridden 6 years before he passed away, so he had a rough go. Rodney was the same as his dad. He liked to farm and do custom combining, and he got 2 combines in a truck, and he would start with the harvest up where the wheat was getting ripe, and then he'd follow it. He went clear down into Texas combining, and we found out in later years that when he combined at Whitney, Texas, that my nephew Burl Hoggett, which is lived there, had watched Rodney combine and thought that was a pretty neat deal that he saw him combining. And I didn't know that until they came to Colorado a few years back. But Donnell Hoggett used to come out a lot. He and Gene came when we lived out Strawberry. And Donnell worked for Texaco Company for I don't know how many years. I mean, he must have been 50 because he's 85 now. And Burl and Bonnie Dell have passed away, but there's still Billy, Ted, and Donnell left. And then Bob passed away in 1976, and I was living on the ranch, and Rod and Sharon were going to get married. They'd planned to get married, and then they were going to change it because of Rodney's dad passing away. And I said, well, why? You know, you can't do anything about it now, so you got your plan to go ahead and get married. And so they were going to rent a trailer down in the Stagecoach Trailer Park. And I said, well, why don't you move out here at the ranch, and I'll get the trailer house. So they took me to Grand Junction, and I bought a trailer house. The sheriff came out one day, and I saw him drive in the yard, and I thought, oh, dear Lord, what's happened now? Because Jenny had told me that morning, she said, I'm going to tell you so you'll know we're skipping school today. This was the day for everybody to skip school, not tell anybody where you're going, but she told me. And Sharon and Rodney had gone to Craig, and I saw the sheriff coming in the driveway, and I thought, oh, dear. So I waited. I let him walk up to the door, and then I opened the door, and I said, what's wrong? And he said, nothing. I just came out to visit with you, see how you were doing. And I said, well, I'm doing fine. If my kids are all right, then I'm fine. And he said, well, good. He said, I just thought I'd come and have a cup of coffee with you. So we sat there and drank coffee for probably an hour and talked about everything that could think of to talk about. And finally he said, how would you like to go to work at the sheriff's office? And I said, do you think I could? And he says, if I didn't think you could, I wouldn't be asking you. And I said, well, gosh, I never thought about that. So he said, well, why don't you come in and do some training, and then we'll see if you like it. Well, you've got a job. So that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I needed a job. I didn't have any money, and that's when the Social Security says you're just in the twilight zone and you don't belong nowhere. So it was great to get the job. And so I went to work there on June the 1st, 1976, and worked there for just almost 20 years, which was good. I was a dispatcher and learned a lot and cried a lot. And then Jenny, when she got married and went to Julesburg, she was the sheriff over there asked her if she'd like to go to work and be a dispatcher like her mother. So she was dispatching, and then we found out later that Patty Johnson had gone to work for State Patrol in 1970 as a dispatcher. So we had 3 dispatchers in the family, and Rex and Kathy's son. I never mentioned them when I was talking about Roy. Their son Russell is a police officer. He was started out as a police officer, and then now he's a detective for the Westminster Police Department. So
that's where I live.
Yeah, not too far from you, I don't think.
I live in Westminster.
I know, but I say I don't think he lives too far from you. When I was talking about Roy, I didn't talk about Rex and Kathy, and they had 2 sons, Michael and Russell. And then Russell married Nikki, and they have Dalton and Sydney. And Michael and Michelle live in Jacksonville, Florida. And they have 2 nifty, neat dogs, and they are just as cute as they can be. And they've got a beautiful home, and they just built a new swimming pool last summer, so I think I'll go down and go swimming with them.